Admiral Kethvar's remaining fleet retreated beyond the range of Earth's solar weapons, but the damage was already done. Not to his ships, those could be replaced. The damage was to something far more dangerous, the faith his empire had in its own power. In the command center of his flagship, Kethvar reviewed reports that made his blood run cold. The humans had destroyed nearly half his fleet, but more importantly, they had done something no enemy had ever accomplished. They had shown the enslaved species throughout his empire that the Vorthak could be hurt. "Sir, we're receiving disturbing communications from the Kethari system," Sub-Commander Velthar reported, his voice tight with worry. "The slave population there is asking questions about the human resistance." "What kind of questions?" "They want to know why they don't fight like the humans do. They're asking why they should work in our factories when the humans would rather die than serve us." Kethvar felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of his ship. For 300 years, the Vorthak Empire had ruled through overwhelming force. No species had ever successfully resisted them, because resistance had always seemed impossible. But the humans had changed that. On the enslaved world of Kelthera Prime, Kelmira worked in a weapons factory that produced guns for Vorthak soldiers. For decades, she had assembled the very weapons used to keep her people in chains. But today, as she listened to human broadcasts on a hidden communication device, something inside her began to change. "The humans would rather die than make weapons for their enemies," she whispered to her work partner Thelvara. "They would rather see their cities burn than help build the chains that would bind them." Thelvara looked around nervously. "Don't talk like that. If the guards hear you, they'll send you to the punishment centers." "Maybe," Kelmira agreed. "But maybe it's time to stop being afraid of the punishment centers." She looked at the weapon in her hands, a gun that would be used to kill anyone who dared resist Vorthak rule. Instead of completing the assembly, she quietly removed a critical component and put it in her pocket. The weapon would look finished, but it would not fire when needed. It was a small act of rebellion, barely noticeable. But Kelmira wasn't the only one listening to human broadcasts that day. Back on Earth, the cost of humanity's defiance was becoming clear. Commander Hyunwoo Park walked through the wreckage of Aegis Station's outer ring, where Vorthak missiles had punched through the hull like it was made of paper. Emergency crews worked to seal the breaches, but the damage was extensive. "Sir, final casualty count from the first battle," Lieutenant Da-Yoon Kim reported, her voice heavy with sadness. "We lost 114 ships. Over 50,000 people died defending the perimeter." Hyunwoo stopped walking and closed his eyes. 50,000 people. Friends, colleagues, fellow humans who had chosen to die rather than surrender. "What's the status of our remaining forces?" 47 operational ships, Da-Eun replied. "Most of them are damaged. The repair crews are working around the clock, but we lost most of our shipyards in the first attack. And the enemy? Intelligence estimates they have about 1,200 ships left, still outnumbering us 25-1. Any rational military leader would have seen these numbers as proof that surrender was the only option. But humans had never been entirely rational, especially when their survival was at stake. Captain Dong-Hyun Choi commanded what was left of the Outer System Defense Force, 8 ships that had once been part of a proud fleet of 60. His vessels were held together with emergency patches and determination, but they continued to patrol the edges of human space. "Captain, we're detecting Vorthak supply convoys moving through the asteroid belt," reported his tactical officer. "Should we engage?" Dong-Hyun studied the sensor readings. The enemy convoy was heavily guarded, more than his small force could handle in a direct fight. But humans had learned to fight differently than other species. "Prepare for hit-and-run attacks," he ordered. "We can't destroy the convoy, but we can make them wish they'd never entered our system." His ships struck like ghosts in the darkness, appearing from behind asteroids to fire a few shots before disappearing again. They couldn't win a stand-up fight, but they could make the enemy pay for every kilometer they advanced. One of those hit-and-run attacks was led by Lieutenant Hee-Wan Jung in the corvette Soul's Revenge. Her ship was tiny compared to the Vorthak escorts, but she used her vessel's speed to dance between the larger ships, striking at weak points before they could return fire, effectively. "This is for everyone who died defending our line," she whispered as her ship's weapons tore into a Vorthak supply transport. But the most important battle was happening in the communications networks that connected the galaxy. Ambassador Taehyun Ko had become something he never expected to be, the voice of human resistance. From a hidden transmitter on Earth's moon, he broadcast messages that reached every corner of the Vorthak Empire. His words were simple, but they carried the power to change everything. "We are human," his voice carried across space. "We will not kneel. We will not surrender. We will not be slaves. Every species in this galaxy has the right to choose their own path. The Vorthak tell you that resistance is impossible, but we are here to prove them wrong." The broadcasts included detailed information about human tactics, improvised weapons, and organizational methods. President Jamin Lee had made the decision to share everything, even though it meant giving up advantages that Earth desperately needed. "Sir, if we broadcast our tactical innovations, the Vorthak will learn to counter them," General So-Young Chang had argued. "And if we don't broadcast them, the enslaved species will never learn to fight back," Lee had replied. "What good is saving Earth if we become as selfish as the Vorthak?" Dr. Min Ho-yoon coordinated the intelligence network that made these broadcasts possible. From his command center beneath Earth's surface, he maintained contact with resistance cells that were forming throughout the galaxy. The network was fragile and dangerous, but it was growing. "We're receiving confirmation from the Nethiri homeworld," he reported to President Lee. "Small acts of sabotage are spreading through their industrial centers. Nothing major yet, but it's a start." "What about other species?" "The Cathari have begun coordinated work slowdowns in 7 different systems. The Velthar are asking for copies of our technical manuals. Even some of the Vorthak's own client species are beginning to question the Empire's methods. The revolution was spreading, but it came at a terrible cost. Reports reached Earth of mass executions on worlds where resistance had been discovered. The Vorthak were responding to rebellion with brutal efficiency, killing thousands to prevent the spread of human ideas." Major Gi-hun Park brought these reports to General Chang, his face pale with the weight of the information. "Ma'am, the Vorthak have destroyed 3 entire cities on Kelthera Prime. They're calling it punishment for seditious activities." So-Young read the intelligence report with growing anger. Innocent beings were dying because humanity had shown them that resistance was possible. "Are we responsible for their deaths?" she asked quietly. "No," President Lee said firmly. He had been listening from the doorway. "The Vorthak are responsible for their deaths. We're responsible for giving those beings hope that someday their children might live free." The conversation was interrupted by an urgent communication from Commander Park's station. "Sir, we have a problem." Hyunwoo's voice came through the speakers. "The Vorthak fleet is regrouping. Intelligence suggests they're preparing for a final assault." "How long do we have?" Lee asked. "Maybe 6 hours. They're bringing everything they have left. Over 1,000 ships. And, sir, they're not just targeting military installations this time. They plan to destroy our cities." The room fell silent. The Vorthak had decided that if they couldn't conquer humanity, they would erase it completely. The final battle was coming, and Earth's defenders were outnumbered more than 20 to 1. But across the galaxy, the seeds of revolution that humanity had planted were beginning to bloom. On Kelthera Prime, Kelmira and her fellow workers had sabotaged an entire weapons factory. On the Cathari homeworld, a general strike had shut down the Empire's largest fuel processing center. On dozens of other worlds, enslaved beings were discovering that they didn't have to accept their chains. The human example was spreading like wildfire through the Empire. Admiral Kethvar had come to destroy one small world, but instead he had awakened something that threatened to tear his empire apart from within. As Earth prepared for its final battle, President Lee made one last broadcast to the galaxy. "We may not survive the coming fight, but we have proven something important. We have proven that no one has to kneel. No one has to surrender their freedom. No one has to accept slavery as their fate. Remember us, and remember that some things are worth dying for." The message reached Kelmira as she prepared to lead her fellow workers in an armed uprising. It reached the Cathari rebels as they planned to seize control of their orbital defense platforms. It reached enslaved beings on 100 worlds who were learning that they didn't have to remain slaves forever. The final warning had become something more than Earth's defiance. It had become the galaxy's Declaration of Independence. The massive alien ship hung in space like a metal mountain. Inside its dark halls, creatures with gray skin and black eyes sat around a glowing table. Admiral Kethvar looked at the blue planet spinning on the screen in front of them. "Earth looks so small and peaceful from this distance. This world has refused our generous offer for too long. Kethvar said in his deep voice. His long fingers tapped against the metal table. The humans think they can stand against the great Vorthak Empire. Sub-Commander Velthar laughed, showing his sharp teeth. They have only 300 ships, Admiral. We brought 2,000. This will be easier than taking candy from a child. On the other side of the galaxy, Commander Hyunwoo Park stood on the bridge of Earth's defense station. Through the large windows, he could see the stars twinkling in the darkness. But today, those stars looked different. Hidden among them was the largest alien fleet anyone had ever seen. "Sir, we're getting a message from the alien fleet," said Lieutenant Da-Yun Kim from her seat at the communications panel. Her fingers moved quickly over the buttons as strange sounds came through the speakers. "Put it through the translator," Hyunwoo ordered. He had been expecting this moment for weeks, ever since Earth's long-range sensors detected the approaching fleet. The alien voice came through clear and cold. "People of Earth, this is Admiral Kethvar of the Vorthak Empire. You have 48 hours to surrender your world. Join our empire as servants and your lives will be spared. Refuse and we will destroy every living thing on your planet." Da-Yun looked at her commander with wide eyes. "Sir, should I send a reply?" "Not yet," Hyunwoo said quietly. "This decision is too big for one person to make." Down on Earth's surface, President Jamin Lee sat in the emergency meeting room, deep beneath the capital city. Around the long table sat the most important people on the planet. Some looked scared, others looked angry, but all of them understood that the next few hours would decide humanity's future. "We need to think about this carefully," said Senator Chang Ho Kim, wiping sweat from his forehead. 2,000 ships against 300. Maybe we should consider their offer. General So Young Chang slammed her hand on the table. "Consider their offer? You mean consider becoming slaves? I've seen what the Vorthak do to the species they conquer. They don't just take their freedom, they take their souls." Dr. Min Ho Yoon, Earth's top expert on alien species, stood up slowly. He had studied the Vorthak for many years, and what he learned kept him awake at night. The general is right. The Vorthak don't just want to rule us. They want to erase everything that makes us human. He pressed a button and pictures appeared on the wall screen. These are the Cathari people. They had beautiful cities, amazing art, and rich cultures. Look at them now. The pictures showed gray-skinned beings working in dark factories, their eyes empty and lifeless. The Vorthak took away their languages, their traditions, even their names. They are not people anymore, they are just tools. President Lee looked around the table at each person. These were smart people, good people, but they were scared. And they had every right to be scared. "What are our chances if we fight?" General Chang took a deep breath. "Honestly, sir, very small. Our ships are good and our people are brave, but we're outnumbered almost 7-1. In a straight fight, we would lose." "Then why are we even talking about fighting?" asked Senator Kim. "If we can't win, shouldn't we try to save as many lives as possible?" Dr. Yoon shook his head. "You still don't understand. There is no saving lives with the Vorthak. They will work us to death in their factories. Our children will grow up speaking their language, thinking their thoughts. In 50 years, there will be no humans left, just more Vorthak slaves." The room fell silent. Outside, people went about their daily lives, not knowing that their leaders were deciding between death and something worse than death. President Lee stood up and walked to the window. He could see normal people walking on the street below. A mother pushed her baby in a stroller. 2 old men played chess in the park. Children ran home from school with backpacks bouncing on their shoulders. "I keep thinking about my daughter," he said quietly. "She's 7 years old. She loves to draw pictures of flowers and asks a million questions every day. If we surrender, she might live, but she won't be my daughter anymore. She'll be whatever the Vorthak want her to be." He turned back to the group. "I became president to protect these people, to protect their right to live free lives. How can I give that away, even to save their lives?" General Chang nodded. "Sir, our military analysis shows we can't win a traditional battle. But humans have never been traditional fighters. We fight for things other species don't understand. We fight for ideas, for dreams, for the right to make our own mistakes." "What are you saying, General?" asked Senator Kim. "I'm saying that maybe winning isn't about destroying all their ships. Maybe winning is about showing the galaxy that some species won't kneel no matter what." Dr. Yoon pulled up more pictures on the screen. "I've been monitoring communications across the Vorthak Empire. The enslaved species are watching us. This is the first time in centuries that anyone has said no to the Vorthak. If we fight, If we show them that resistance is possible, it might inspire others. President Lee made his decision. Draft a message to the HFY fleet. Tell them our answer is no. Tell them that Earth will never surrender, and if they want our world, they'll have to take it from our cold, dead hands. 1 hour later, the message went out to every human colony, every ship, every station. President Lee's voice carried across space to millions of people. My fellow humans, we face our darkest hour. An enemy more powerful than any we have ever known demands our surrender. They want us to trade our freedom for our lives. But some things are more important than living. Some things are worth dying for. Today we choose to remain human. Today we choose to fight. The message reached Commander Hyun-woo on his space station. He looked at Lieutenant Da-eun, who had tears in her eyes but steel in her voice. Sir, should I send our reply to the HFY fleet? Hyun-woo nodded. Send this message, cross this line, and face humanity's wrath. This is your final warning. Across space, Admiral HFY received the human message. He read it twice, then began to laugh. Final warning? From them to us? He turned to his officers. Prepare the fleet for attack. Let's show these humans what happens when insects try to threaten giants. The die was cast. In 48 hours, the galaxy would learn what humans were truly capable of when their backs were against the wall. Ambassador Tae-hyun-ko straightened his uniform as the small shuttle approached the giant alien ship. His hands were steady, but his heart was beating fast. He carried Earth's official response to the HFY ultimatum, and he knew this might be the last diplomatic mission anyone would ever make to this fleet. The HFY ship was enormous, up close. Its dark metal hull stretched for miles in every direction. Strange lights pulsed along its surface like the heartbeat of some giant metal beast. As his shuttle entered the docking bay, Tae-hyun saw hundreds of smaller ships lined up in perfect rows. 2 HFY soldiers met him at the airlock. They were tall and thin, with gray skin and eyes like black holes. They didn't speak as they led him through corridors filled with strange smells and odd sounds. The walls were covered with writing in alien languages, and everywhere he looked, he saw enslaved beings from different worlds working at various tasks. Admiral HFY waited in a large room with a high ceiling. The alien leader sat behind a desk made from what looked like polished bone. His dark eyes studied the human ambassador like a scientist examining an interesting bug. So, HFY said in perfect English, the humans send a messenger. I hope you bring better news than your last communication. Tae-hyun placed a small device on the desk. This contains Earth's official response to your ultimatum, Admiral. President Lee asked me to deliver it personally. HFY activated the device. President Lee's voice filled the room. To Admiral HFY and the HFY Empire, we have considered your generous offer to become slaves in your empire. Our answer is simple, no. We will not surrender our freedom, our dignity, or our right to choose our own path. You have been warned. Cross the line we have drawn around our world, and face humanity's wrath. We will show you what happens when you threaten everything we hold dear. The Admiral listened to the entire message without moving. When it ended, he looked at Tae-hyun with something that might have been amusement.
Humanity's wrath?
You have 300 ships. We have 2,000. Your wrath seems rather small. Numbers don't tell the whole story, Admiral, Tae-hyun replied calmly. You've conquered many worlds, but you've never fought humans before. Humans are not special, Sub-Commander Velthar said from his position near the wall. We have defeated species with stronger ships, better weapons, larger armies. What makes you think you're different? Tae-hyun thought about his answer carefully. Because we fight for things you don't understand. You fight for territory, for resources, for power. We fight for ideas. We fight for the right to be free, even if that freedom kills us. HFY stood up and walked around his desk. He was much taller than the human ambassador, and he used his size to try to intimidate his guest. Freedom is just a word, human. When your ships are burning and your cities are ash, your freedom won't save you. Maybe not, Tae-hyun agreed, but it will make us dangerous in ways you've never seen before. Meanwhile, on Earth's orbital defense platform, Commander Hyun-woo Park was making final preparations for the battle everyone knew was coming. The platform hummed with activity as technicians checked weapon systems and engineers reinforced shields. How long until the HFY fleet reaches our perimeter? He asked Lieutenant Da-eun Kim. 18 hours, sir, she replied, not looking up from her instruments. They're moving slowly, probably trying to intimidate us with their size. Let them come slowly, Hyun-woo said. Every hour gives us more time to prepare. Down on Earth's surface, Captain Dong-hyun Choi was overseeing the evacuation of civilian stations in the outer solar system. His ships moved carefully between the mining platforms and research stations, loading families and workers onto transport vessels. "Captain, the mining station at Titan is refusing to evacuate," reported his communications officer. "They say they've lived there for 30 years and won't be chased away by aliens." Dong-hyun sighed. "Humans were brave, sometimes too brave for their own good. Tell them that staying won't help anyone. We need every civilian safe so our military can focus on fighting." His sister, Yejin Choi, worked frantically in a secret laboratory deep beneath Earth's surface. Project Prometheus was almost ready, but almost wasn't good enough. The weapon system she had designed would either save humanity or fail spectacularly. There was no middle ground. "The solar collectors are responding correctly," she told her assistant, as she checked readings on dozens of screens. "But the focusing system needs more time to calibrate." "How much more time?" asked Dr. Wei Min Song, the project director. 6 hours minimum," Yejin replied. "Maybe 8. The Vorthak will be here in 18 hours. You have 12 hours maximum before the shooting starts." Yejin nodded grimly and went back to work. Her brother was out there risking his life to buy her time. She wouldn't waste a single minute of it. Back on the Vorthak flagship, Tae-hyun finished his diplomatic mission. "Admiral, I've delivered our message. Now I have a question for you." "Ask your question, human. Have you ever wondered why no one has ever successfully rebelled against your empire?" Kethavar's eyes narrowed. "Because resistance is futile. We are too strong." "No," Tae-hyun said quietly. "It's because no one has ever shown them how. Every species you've conquered has fought to survive. They fought to save their lives, their families, their worlds. But humans fight for something bigger than survival. And what is that? The right to say no. The right to choose death over slavery. Once other species see that someone is willing to die for freedom, they'll remember what freedom feels like." Admiral Kethvar studied the human ambassador for a long moment. There was something disturbing about this conversation, though he couldn't quite identify what it was. "You think your sacrifice will inspire others to rebel?" "I think you're about to find out," Tae-hyun replied. As the ambassador's shuttle returned to Earth, Admiral Kethvar called his senior officers together. "Begin the attack," he ordered. "I want this over quickly. The longer we take, the more time they have to spread their dangerous ideas." The great Vorthak fleet began to move forward. 2,000 ships advancing in perfect formation toward the small blue world that had dared to defy them. At the edge of the solar system, automated beacons marked the line humans had drawn in space. Holographic displays showed the boundary clearly, 1 light hour from Earth's orbit. Sub-Commander Velthar looked at the tactical display. "Admiral, our sensors show only 50 human ships positioned along their defensive line." "Where are the other 250? "Hiding, most likely," Kethvar replied. "They probably plan to ambush us from behind asteroids or gas clouds." Standard tactics, but Kethvar was wrong. The other human ships weren't hiding. They were positioned exactly where they needed to be for a plan that no rational species would ever consider. A plan that would either save Earth or destroy it completely. On Earth's defense platform, Commander Hyunwoo watched the alien fleet approach their perimeter. In a few hours, those ships would cross the line humanity had drawn. When they did, the galaxy would learn something new about the species from the small blue world. "All stations report ready, sir," Lieutenant Dayun announced. "Very well," Hyunwoo replied. "Send a message to all human forces. When they cross our line, show them what humanity looks like when we're angry." The countdown to war had begun. The first Vorthak ship crossed the line at exactly 14:32 Earth Standard Time. It was a small scout vessel, nothing more than a metal dot against the stars. But the moment its hull passed the holographic boundary humans had drawn in space, everything changed. Commander Hyunwoo Park watched from his command center as the enemy ship violated their perimeter. His hands were steady as he pressed the communication button that connected him to every human ship, station, and outpost in the solar system. "All units," he said in a calm voice that carried the weight of humanity's fury. "Weapons free. Show them hell." What happened next would be talked about in alien military academies for centuries to come, though most species would never truly understand it. The human ships didn't follow any tactical manual or strategic doctrine. Instead, They attacked with a savage intensity that defied all logic. Lieutenant Wu Jin Han commanded the destroyer Soul's Fury, positioned behind a large asteroid near the outer edge of the perimeter. When the HFY fleet crossed the line, his ship emerged from hiding like an angry hornet. But instead of engaging the enemy ships in a traditional gun battle, Wu Jin did something that shocked even his own crew. "Sir, the HFY Dreadnought Bone Crusher is directly ahead," reported his weapons officer. "We have a clear shot with our main guns." "Negative," Wu Jin replied. "All power to engines. Set collision course, sir." The weapons officer looked confused. "Did you say collision course?" "You heard me correctly. All hands prepare for ramming speed." The Soul's Fury accelerated toward the massive alien ship like a bullet fired from a gun. The HFY vessel was 10 times larger and carried enough firepower to destroy a small moon. But Wu Jin didn't care about odds or tactical advantages. His ship had been damaged in the opening exchange of fire, its weapon systems failing and hull breached in 3 places. "Sir, we could retreat and repair the damage," his engineering officer suggested over the communication system. "Retreat?" Wu Jin laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "They wanted to see what happens when you threaten our home. Time to give them a demonstration." The Soul's Fury struck the Bone Crusher at nearly 30% of light speed. The impact created an explosion visible from Earth's surface, a brief new star that outshone the sun for exactly 2.3 seconds. Both ships were destroyed instantly, but the psychological effect on the HFY fleet was devastating. What kind of species destroys their own ships to damage the enemy? Sub-Commander Velthar asked Admiral Kethavar as they watched the explosion fade. "Insane species," the Admiral replied, but his voice carried a note of uncertainty that hadn't been there before. Across the battle zone, similar scenes played out dozens of times. Captain Minsuli's cruiser lost its main reactor and was slowly dying from radiation poisoning. Instead of abandoning ship, his crew voted to use their remaining power for one final attack. They rammed their crippled vessel into a HFY supply ship, destroying both craft and cutting off fuel supplies to an entire enemy squadron. The destroyer Busan's Pride suffered critical damage when enemy fire breached its ammunition storage. Any rational crew would have ejected immediately to save their lives. Instead, Captain Sora Park ordered her ship to fly directly into the center of a HFY formation before the ammunition exploded. The blast destroyed her vessel and damaged 6 enemy ships. General So Young Chang watched the battle from Earth's war room, her face expressionless as casualty reports flooded in. Each number represented brave people who had chosen death over surrender. But each sacrifice also achieved strategic objectives that no traditional attack could have accomplished. "Ma'am, the HFY are pulling their capital ships back," reported Major Gi-hun Park, her aide. "They're afraid of more ramming attacks." "Good," So Young replied coldly. "Fear is a weapon we can use. Signal all remaining units, continue attacking. Make them pay for every meter of space they advance." But the real surprise was yet to come. Deep beneath Earth's surface, engineer Yejin Choi made final adjustments to Project Prometheus. The system she had designed would either save her world or destroy it. There was no middle ground. "Solar collectors are fully charged," she announced to the control room. "Focusing satellites are in position. We have one shot at this." Dr. Wayman Song looked at the readings on his screen. "The power levels are incredible. Are you sure the focusing array can handle this much energy?" "Honestly? No," Yejin admitted. "We're trying to turn our sun into a weapon. The theoretical calculations say it should work, but theory and reality don't always match. If this fails, the energy backlash could destroy every satellite in Earth orbit," Dr. Song warned. "If this fails, the HFY will destroy everything anyway," Yejin replied. "At least this way we go down fighting." She initiated the sequence that would change the course of the battle. Around Earth's sun, invisible collectors began gathering stellar energy and focusing it into tight beams. The process took exactly 47 minutes. 47 minutes during which human ships continued their desperate, seemingly suicidal attacks against overwhelming odds. Admiral Kethvar was beginning to understand that he faced an enemy unlike any other. The humans weren't fighting to win in any conventional sense. They were fighting to prove a point, and they were willing to die to make that point clear. "Sir, we've lost 37 ships," Velthar reported. "The humans have lost 41. But their tactics are disturbing the crew." "Disturbing how?" "The enslaved species that work on our ships are watching the battle. They're seeing humans choose death over surrender. Some of them are asking questions we don't want them to ask. Before HFY could respond, the sun behind them seemed to flicker. For just a moment, the star that warmed Earth appeared to pulse with unusual energy. Then beams of concentrated solar fire lanced across space, striking HFY ships with the power of creation itself. The first beam cut through the heavy cruiser Dark Victory like it was made of paper. The second destroyed 2 destroyers simultaneously. The third, fourth, and fifth beams swept across the HFY formation, turning proud warships into glowing vapor. What is that? Velthar screamed as more beams reached out from Earth's star. How are they controlling solar energy? HFY had no answer. In all his centuries of conquest, he had never seen weapons that used a star itself as ammunition. The humans had somehow found a way to weaponize their own sun, turning the source of life on their world into an instrument of death for their enemies. Lieutenant Da-Eun Kim watched the solar beams destroy enemy ships and allowed herself a moment of hope. Sir, the solar weapon system is working perfectly. We've destroyed over 100 HFY vessels. Commander Hyun-woo nodded, but his expression remained grim. How many shots do we have left? The energy collectors need 6 hours to recharge between uses, Da-Eun replied. And the focusing satellites are showing stress damage. Maybe 2 more volleys maximum. Then we'd better make them count. Across the galaxy, other species watched the battle through long-range sensors and communication intercepts. On the enslaved world of Kelthera Prime, a Nethiri engineer named Kelmira saw humans choosing death over slavery and felt something she hadn't experienced in decades. Hope. They're actually fighting back, she whispered to her work partner. They're showing the HFY that someone can say no. Similar conversations were happening on dozens of worlds throughout the HFY Empire. The concept of resistance buried under centuries of oppression was beginning to stir. The humans weren't just fighting for their own freedom. They were showing the galaxy what freedom looked like. Admiral HFY watched half his fleet disappear under the solar assault and felt something he had never experienced before. Doubt. The humans were supposed to surrender when faced with overwhelming force. They were supposed to choose survival over principle, but these creatures from the small blue world had turned his understanding of warfare upside down. They fought not to live, but to prove that some things were worth dying for, and their example was spreading to every corner of his empire. Sir, Velthar reported quietly, we're receiving reports of unrest on 7 different worlds. The enslaved populations are watching the human broadcasts and asking why they don't resist like the humans do. HFY stared at the tactical display showing his reduced fleet. He had come here expecting an easy conquest. Instead, he had found something far more dangerous than enemy ships or powerful weapons. He had found an idea that could destroy his empire from within. 6 months had passed since the first HFY ship crossed humanity's line, and the galaxy was burning, not with the fire of conquest that Admiral HFY had planned, but with the flames of revolution that no amount of military force could extinguish. HFY stood in his command center, staring at reports that would have seemed impossible just half a year ago. The HFY Empire, which had ruled unchallenged for centuries, was collapsing from within. What had begun as a simple conquest of one small world had become a galaxy-wide uprising. Sir, we've lost contact with the Veltar colonies, Sub-Commander Velthar reported, his voice hollow with defeat. The last transmission indicated that the slave populations had taken control of the orbital defense platforms. What about the Cathari system? Complete revolt? The Cathari have destroyed our administrative centers and declared independence. They're using the same tactics they learned from human broadcasts. Coordinated strikes against strategic targets, followed by guerrilla warfare. HFY closed his eyes and tried to process the magnitude of the disaster. His empire was being torn apart by beings he had considered nothing more than useful tools. And it was all because one small world had dared to say no. On Earth, the situation looked almost as desperate from a different perspective. Commander Hyun-woo Park's defense force now consisted of exactly 9 operational ships. The orbital defense platforms were ruins, held together by emergency patches and the stubborn refusal of their crews to abandon their posts. Lieutenant Da-Eun Kim worked from a bunker deep beneath the wreckage of Aegis Station. Her communication equipment was a mixture of salvaged parts and improvised repairs, but somehow she maintained contact with rebel groups across the galaxy. Sir, "We're receiving reports from over 40 different star systems," she told her commander. "The revolutionaries are coordinating their attacks. They're hitting HFY supply lines, communication networks, and administrative centers simultaneously." Hyunwoo looked at the tactical display showing the positions of the remaining HFY fleet. Over 1,000 enemy ships surrounded Earth, but they seemed reluctant to close in for the final attack. "Why aren't they finishing us off?" "Because they can't spare the ships," Daun replied. "Every time they pull forces away from the rebellious systems, the uprisings get stronger. They're fighting a war on 50 different fronts, and they're losing." Captain Dong-Hyun Choi led the final charge when Admiral Kethvar made his desperate attempt to destroy Earth once and for all. His ship, the Incheon's last stand, was held together by determination and welding patches. The engines made worrying noises, the weapons systems sparked with each shot, and the hull showed stress fractures that should have been repaired months ago. "All ships, follow my lead," he commanded over the communication system. "We may not have many ships left, but we've got something they'll never understand. We're fighting for our home." The 9 human vessels charged toward the massive HFY fleet like David running toward Goliath. Logic said they should all die within minutes, but logic had stopped applying to this war long ago. Engineer Ye-Jin Choi had spent months improving the solar weapon system. The focusing satellites were held together with spare parts and prayers, but they still worked. As her brother led his ships into battle, she prepared to give them the best support she could. "Solar collectors are at maximum charge," she announced to the control room. "Focusing array is responding despite the damage. We have maybe 3 shots before the whole system fails." Dr. Wayman Song looked at the stress readings with concern. "The satellites are showing metal fatigue in critical components. If we push them too hard, we could lose the whole network. If we don't push them hard enough, we lose everything anyway," Ye-Jin replied. She thought about her brother out there in his damaged ship, facing impossible odds because someone had to stand between Earth and destruction. The solar beams lanced out across space with the power of a controlled star, striking HFY ships and turning them into expanding clouds of plasma. But this time the enemy was ready. They had learned from previous attacks and positioned their ships to minimize the effectiveness of the solar weapons. "We got 12 ships with the first volley," the weapons coordinator reported, "but they're adapting their formations." "Then we adapt too," Ye-Jin said grimly. "Retarget for maximum spread. I'd rather damage 50 ships than destroy 5. The battle that followed would be remembered as the moment when humanity's stubborn refusal to surrender finally broke the HFY Empire's ability to fight. Not because the humans won in any traditional sense, they were still hopelessly outnumbered, but because their example had inspired something unstoppable. As the Earth ships fought their desperate battle, similar scenes played out across the galaxy. On Kelthera Prime, Kelmira led a group of former factory workers in an assault on the planetary command center. They had no military training and improvised weapons, but they had learned from human broadcasts that courage could overcome superior firepower. "Remember," she told her fighters as they prepared to attack, "we don't have to win. We just have to prove that we won't be slaves anymore." The Kelthera assault succeeded not because the rebels were stronger than their guards, but because half the HFY garrison had been pulled away to fight other uprisings. The Empire no longer had enough forces to maintain control everywhere. Ambassador Tae Hyun-ko continued broadcasting from his hidden station on Earth's moon, even as HFY missiles destroyed the surface installations around him. His words reached across space to inspire beings who had never dreamed of freedom. "This is what we have learned," he said in his final broadcast. "Freedom isn't something that others can give you. It's something you take for yourself. It's something you fight for, even when the fight seems hopeless. It's something worth dying for because life without freedom isn't really life at all." Dr. Min Ho-yoon coordinated the intelligence network that had grown beyond his wildest expectations. From his underground command center, he tracked revolutionary activities on over 60 different worlds. The network was no longer fragile. It had become a web of resistance that the HFY could not break. "The revolution has reached critical mass," he reported to President Lee. "Even if they destroyed Earth tomorrow, the uprisings would continue. We've shown them that resistance is possible, and that's a lesson they'll never forget." The turning point came when Admiral Kethvar received a message that changed everything. It came from his own flagship, from the enslaved beings who had served his empire faithfully for decades. "Admiral," the message said in perfect Vorthak. "We have listened to the human broadcasts. We have learned what freedom means. We choose freedom over service. We choose dignity over safety. We choose to fight rather than kneel." The revolt aboard the Vorthak flagship was led by a Cathari engineer named Telmorth, who had maintained the ship's engines for 15 years. He and his fellow workers didn't try to capture the ship. They simply made it impossible for the Vorthak to use it effectively. The engines began producing only half power. The weapon systems developed mysterious failures. The communication networks experienced constant interference. The ship could still function, but barely. Similar sabotage spread throughout the Vorthak fleet as enslaved crew members followed the example of their human prisoners and chose resistance over submission. The Empire's greatest weakness, its dependence on slave labor, had become a fatal vulnerability. Major Gihun Park was among the human prisoners who had been taken during the early battles. Instead of trying to escape, he had spent months teaching his fellow prisoners and the enslaved alien crew about human concepts of freedom and dignity. "You don't have to be strong to be free," he told a group of Netheri workers in the ship's engine room. "You just have to decide that you won't be a slave anymore. Once you make that decision, everything else follows." When the revolts began, Major Park found himself leading a mixed group of humans and aliens in taking control of key systems throughout the ship. They didn't have weapons or military training, but they had something more powerful: the absolute certainty that some things were worth any sacrifice. Admiral Kethvar realized the terrible truth as he watched his empire crumble. The humans had won not by defeating his fleet, but by teaching his slaves to defeat themselves. The idea of freedom, once introduced, could not be contained or controlled. "Sir," Velthar reported with barely contained panic, "we are receiving surrender requests from our own commanders. They're saying their crews are in revolt and they can't maintain control." Kethavar looked out at the small blue world that had caused all this chaos. Earth was still there, still defiant, still broadcasting its dangerous message of hope to every corner of the galaxy. He had come here to conquer a single world, and instead had lost an empire. The final battle was not between ships and weapons, but between ideas. And humanity's idea, that freedom was worth any price, had proven stronger than the Vorthak concept of order through domination. As his flagship began to experience its own internal revolts, Admiral Kethavar faced a choice no Vorthak commander had ever confronted: surrender to beings he had always considered inferior, or watch his entire civilization collapse into chaos. The line that humanity had drawn in space had become something far more significant than